Hi everyone, welcome back to a new Roblox story. This time, the story is about the popular Roblox game. Steal a Brainrot, let us know in the comments what your best Brainrot is. As always, not all of our stories are based on true events, but some are. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. If you dare. The Peterson family lived in a quiet house on Maple Street, but their home was anything but ordinary. Every shelf, every corner, and every available space was filled with colourful plastic figures, plushies, and collectibles from the most popular game on Roblox, Steal a Brainrot. 12-year-old Jake Peterson sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, carefully arranging his newest additions to his collection. "Mom, Dad, come look at this," Jake called excitedly, holding up a shimmering golden figure. "I finally got the gold mutation Nubini Pizzanini. It was so expensive, but totally worth it." Sarah Peterson rushed upstairs, her own arms full of shopping bags from the local toy store. "Oh, honey, that's amazing. Wait until you see what I found today." She dumped the contents of her bags onto Jake's bed, revealing dozens of new Brainrot characters. They had the entire Epic Tier collection on sale. I got Cappuccino Assassino, Ballerina Cappuccina, and even Trippy Troppy. Mark Peterson appeared in the doorway, grinning widely as he held up his phone. "Guess what just spawned in my base? La Vaca Saturno Saturnita, the cosmic cow herself. I've been trying to get her for months." He did a little victory dance, his Steal a Brainrot t-shirt stretching over his rounded belly. The Peterson family wasn't just interested in the game. They were completely obsessed. Their dining room table was covered with trading cards. Their living room had glass display cases showing off their rarest figures, and their garage had been converted into a Brainrot museum where they kept their most valuable collectibles. Friends and neighbours thought it was cute at first, but lately people had started whispering that maybe the Petersons had taken their hobby a little too far. "All right, family gaming time," Sarah announced, clapping her hands together. "Everyone grab your tablets. The Candy Aurora event starts in 10 minutes. And I want to make sure we're all ready." Jake jumped up from the floor, stepping carefully around his scattered collection. "I've been saving up my Robux for weeks. If I can get a diamond mutation during the event, I'll have enough money per second to buy a secret tier character." The family settled into their usual spots in the living room. Mark claimed the big recliner, Sarah curled up on the couch with her favourite Bombadero Crocodilo pillow, and Jake sprawled on the carpet with his back against the coffee table. Each of them had their tablet open to Roblox, their avatars standing in their respective bases in Steal a Brainrot. "Okay, remember the plan," Mark said, adjusting his reading glasses as he squinted at his screen. "Jake, you watch the north spawn point. Sarah, you take east. I'll cover west and south. If anyone sees a rare spawn, we call it out immediately." "Got it," Jake said, his fingers dancing across his tablet screen as he positioned his avatar near the red conveyor belt in the center of the map. The familiar sight of the 8 bases surrounding the spawning area filled him with excitement. Other players were already gathering, their colorful avatars bouncing around impatiently. Sarah's character, dressed in a bright pink outfit with sparkly accessories, stood near one of the shops. "Oh look, there's that player Stormy Knight again. She always tries to steal from my base during events. I'm definitely locking up tight tonight." "Smart thinking," Mark nodded approvingly. His avatar, wearing a professional suit despite being in a silly collecting game, walked over to check his base's defenses. "I just bought 3 new traps yesterday. Anyone who tries to steal from me is going to get a nasty surprise." As they waited for the event to begin, Jake looked around his real-world collection. His bedroom walls were covered with posters of the various Brainrot characters in all their chaotic glory. Tim Cheese, the meme-famous cheese mascot, grinned down at him from above his bed. Literally Larry La, the desert elephant with ticking clock accessories, seemed to watch him from the bookshelf. Even the ultra-rare characters like Asok Sokola, the anthropomorphic school building with its gleeful face, had places of honor in his display cases. Event starting in 30 seconds, Sarah called out, her voice filled with anticipation. Jake's heart started beating faster. This was his favourite part, the rush of excitement as rare characters began spawning, the competition with other players, the strategy of when to steal and when to defend. He'd been playing Steal a Brainrot for almost 2 years now, and it never got old. "Here we go," Mark shouted, as colourful sparkles began appearing on their screens. The Candy Aurora had begun, and special candy-themed mutations of various characters started materialising on the central conveyor belt. "Oh my gosh, Candy Mutation Frigo Camelo!" Jake yelled, his avatar racing toward the spawning point. The Refrigerator Camel hybrid was one of his favourite mythic tier characters, and the candy mutation made it even more valuable. But as Jake's avatar reached for the character, another player swooped in and grabbed it first. "No way!" Jake groaned, slumping back against the coffee table. "Don't worry, honey," Sarah said soothingly, though her eyes never left her own screen. "There are plenty more spawns coming. Oh, there's a candy mutation, Tung Sahur, the nocturnal drum beater." For the next hour, the Peterson family was completely absorbed in the game. They cheered when they successfully collected rare characters, groaned when other players stole from their bases, and strategized constantly about the best ways to protect their most valuable assets. The real world seemed to fade away as they became lost in the colourful, chaotic universe of Steal a Brainrot. It was nearly midnight when they finally decided to call it quits for the evening. Each family member had managed to collect at least one rare candy mutation, and their virtual bank accounts were healthier than ever. "Great session tonight, team," Mark said, stretching his arms above his head. "I think we're definitely in the running for the family leaderboard this month." "Absolutely," Sarah agreed, carefully placing her tablet on the charging station. "Jake, don't forget to lock your base before you go to sleep. You know how active the raiders are during overnight hours." "Already done, Mom," Jake said, though he was still staring at his screen. Something had caught his attention, a small glitch in the graphics that made one of his characters appear to flicker slightly. "Hey, is anyone else's game acting weird?" Mark and Sarah looked at their own screens, but everything appeared normal. "Probably just a connection issue," Mark said dismissively. "The servers always get a little wonky during big events. Too many players online at once." Jake shrugged and set his tablet aside, but something about the glitch bothered him. For just a moment, it had looked like the candy mutation Tim Cheese in his collection had turned its head to look directly at him through the screen. But that was impossible, right? Characters in Steal a Brainrot didn't have animations like that. As the family headed upstairs to bed, none of them noticed the way the shadows in their Brainrot collection seemed to shift slightly in the dim light. None of them saw how the plastic eyes of their figures appeared to follow their movements. And none of them heard the very faint sound, almost like a whisper, that seemed to come from somewhere among the hundreds of collectibles that filled their home. Jake brushed his teeth and changed into his pajamas, a matching set covered in tiny Gripus Medusae patterns that his mum had bought him for his birthday. As he climbed into bed, he glanced one more time at his tablet to check on his Steal a Brainrot base. Everything looked secure. His characters were safely locked away, his defenses were activated, and his most valuable collectibles were stored in his virtual vault. But as Jake was about to turn off his tablet, he noticed something that made his stomach flutter with unease. In the corner of his screen, barely visible, was a character he didn't recognize. It looked almost like a shadow version of one of his favorites, dark, distorted, and wrong somehow. When he tried to tap on it to get a closer look, it vanished. "Probably just tired," Jake mumbled to himself, setting the tablet on his nightstand. "Been playing too long." He closed his eyes and tried to fall asleep, but every time he was about to drift off, he felt like something was watching him. Several times he opened his eyes and looked around his room, but everything appeared normal. His collection sat silently on their shelves, his posters hung motionless on the walls, and his tablet screen was dark and quiet. Finally, exhaustion won over unease, and Jake fell into a deep sleep. Downstairs, Mark was doing his final check of the house before bed. He locked the front door, turned off the lights in the living room, and paused to admire their latest addition to the collection. A limited edition holographic Bombardiro Crocodilo that Sarah had managed to snag from an online auction. Beautiful, he whispered, adjusting the figure's position slightly so it caught the moonlight streaming through the window. The bomb-dropping crocodile seemed to gleam with an inner light, its wings spread wide as if preparing for flight. Mark was about to head upstairs when he heard a sound from the garage, their converted Brainrot museum. It was probably just the house settling, but he decided to check it out anyway. Their most valuable pieces were stored out there, and he'd been worrying about security lately. He flicked on the garage light and stepped inside, immediately feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. Hundreds of figures lined custom-built shelves, organized by rarity and character type. The crown jewel of their collection sat in a special climate-controlled case, an authentic prototype Lirili Larila that had been signed by one of the game's developers. Everything looked exactly as it should, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The air felt thicker somehow, charged with an energy he couldn't quite identify. He walked slowly through the rows of collectibles, checking to make sure nothing had been disturbed. That's when he noticed it. One of the figures, a mythic Tir Frigo Camelo, was facing the wrong direction. Mark was meticulous about the positioning of his collection, and he knew for certain that the refrigerator camel had been facing toward the front of the shelf when he'd organized it that morning. Weird, Mark muttered, reaching out to turn the figure back to its proper position. But as his fingers touched the plastic, he could have sworn he felt it move slightly, as if it had been trying to turn even further. Mark jerked his hand back, his heart beating a little faster. Come on, get it together, he told himself. It's just a toy. He quickly adjusted the figure's position and hurried back toward the house, flicking off the garage light and closing the door firmly behind him. As he climbed the stairs to the bedroom, Mark tried to convince himself that he was just overtired from the long gaming session. There was no way a plastic collectible could move on its own. But even as he settled into bed next to Sarah, who was already fast asleep clutching her ballerina cappuccino nightlight, Mark couldn't stop thinking about the way the Frigo Camelo had felt warm to the touch, almost as if it had been alive. The house grew quiet as the Peterson family slept, but if anyone had been awake to listen carefully, they might have heard something unusual. A soft sound, like plastic scraping against wood, the quiet whisper of fabric rustling, the almost inaudible pat-pat-pat of tiny feet moving across shelves. In Jake's room, the Nubini Pizzanini figure on his nightstand turned its head just a fraction of an inch. Its painted eyes, which had always looked straight ahead, now seemed to be gazing directly at the sleeping boy. Down in the living room, the holographic Bombardiro Crocodilo that Mark had been admiring began to emit a very faint glow. The light was so subtle that it would have been invisible in daylight, but in the darkness of the sleeping house, it pulsed rhythmically like a tiny heartbeat. And in the garage museum, something much more dramatic was happening. The prototype, Lirili Larila in its special case, had begun to sway slightly, its clock accessories ticking in perfect synchronization. Even though the figure had no working clock mechanisms, the Brainrot collection was awakening. As the first rays of dawn crept through the windows of the Peterson house, Jake stirred in his sleep. He was having the strangest dream. In it, he was playing Steal a Brainrot, but instead of being in the familiar map with the 8 bases and red conveyor belt, he was running through his own house. The rooms had been transformed into a massive game arena, with spawning points in every corner and other players chasing him through the hallways. But the weirdest part of the dream was that he wasn't controlling an avatar. He was actually there, running and hiding and trying to protect his collection from raiders who wanted to steal everything he'd worked so hard to gather. "Jake! Breakfast!" Sarah's voice called from downstairs. pulling him out of the strange dream. Jake rubbed his eyes and sat up, feeling more tired than refreshed. The dream had been so vivid that for a moment he expected to see other players hiding behind his furniture. Instead, his room looked exactly as it always did, with his beloved collection arranged neatly on every available surface. Except something looked different about his Nubini Pizzanini figure. Jake could have sworn he'd left it facing toward his computer desk, but now it seemed to be looking toward his bed. He picked up the small plastic character and examined it closely. The paint job was perfect, the details were exactly as they should be, but something about its expression seemed more animated than usual. Probably just the morning light, Jake said to himself, though he carefully turned the figure back to face the desk before getting dressed. Downstairs, the family gathered around the kitchen table for breakfast. Sarah had made pancakes shaped like various Brainrot characters, complete with syrup designs that mimicked their colours and patterns. "These are amazing, Mom," Jake said, cutting into a pancake that looked remarkably like Tim cheese. "You're getting really good at the character shapes." "Thanks, sweetheart," Sarah beamed, flipping another batch on the griddle. "I've been practicing. I thought we could have themed breakfasts every Saturday." Mark looked up from his coffee and tablet, where he'd been checking his Steal a Brainrot progress from the night before. "Hey, that's weird. My account shows that I collected 3 characters I don't remember getting. When did I pick up a Diamond Mutation Isok Sokola?" "Maybe you got it right before we logged off," Sarah suggested, though she sounded uncertain. "You know how crazy things get during the end of events." "I guess," Mark said, but his brow was furrowed with confusion. "I'm usually pretty good at keeping track of my rare spawns." Jake was about to mention his own strange feeling about his collection when a loud crash came from the garage. All 3 family members jumped, and Mark immediately stood up from the table. "What was that?" Sarah asked, her hand pressed to her chest. "Probably just something falling off a shelf," Mark said, though he was already heading toward the garage door. "I'll go check it out." But when Mark opened the garage and flicked on the lights, everything appeared to be exactly where it belonged. He walked through the museum carefully, checking each display case and shelf, but nothing seemed to be out of place or damaged. "Everything okay out there?" Sarah called. "Yeah, everything's fine," Mark called back, though he was thoroughly puzzled. The crash had been loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood, but there was no evidence of anything falling or breaking. As Mark was about to leave the garage, something caught his eye. The climate-controlled case that housed their prototype, Lirili Larela, was slightly askew, as if it had been moved. The figure inside was still perfectly positioned, but the case itself was rotated about an inch to the left. Mark carefully adjusted the case back to its proper position, making a mental note to check the earthquake straps that secured their most valuable displays. Living in an older house meant dealing with settling and shifting, and he certainly didn't want their prize collectibles getting damaged. But as he turned off the garage light and headed back to the kitchen, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the loud crash had come from inside the house, not the garage. And why would an earthquake or settling cause only one display case to move while leaving everything else untouched? The rest of breakfast passed without incident, and the Peterson family fell into their usual Saturday routine. Sarah worked on organising their latest acquisitions. Mark researched upcoming Brainrot releases and events online, and Jake spent time arranging and rearranging his bedroom collection. "Hey, Mom, Dad," Jake called down the hallway around lunchtime. "Are you planning any trading today? Because I think some of my figures might be in the wrong spots." "What do you mean, honey?" Sarah asked, appearing in his doorway with a feather duster in one hand and a trippy-troppy figure in the other. "Well, I'm pretty sure I had my epic tier characters arranged by size, but now they seem to be grouped by colour instead," Jake explained, gesturing at one of his shelves. "And my Cappuccino Assassino was definitely on the top shelf yesterday, but now it's down here with the rares." Sarah frowned, studying Jake's collection. She prided herself on having a near photographic memory when it came to their Brainrot figures, And Jake was right. Several pieces were definitely in different positions than they'd been the day before. "That is strange," she admitted. "Maybe your dad was in here looking at something and accidentally moved a few pieces." "I haven't touched Jake's collection," Mark's voice came from behind them. He'd been listening from the hallway. "You know I always ask before handling anyone else's figures." The three of them stood in Jake's room, staring at the rearranged collection. It was a mystery, but not necessarily a concerning one. Perhaps one of them had moved the figures and simply forgotten about it. Or maybe the house settling had caused some vibrations that shifted the lighter pieces. "Well, it's not a big deal," Jake said finally. "I kind of like the color arrangement anyway. Makes it easier to see the different mutation types." But as the family went about their day, more small mysteries began to pile up. Sarah found her limited edition ballerina cappuccina in the bathroom instead of its usual spot on her dresser. Mark discovered that his computer was showing Steal a Brainrot gameplay footage that he didn't remember watching. And when they ordered pizza for dinner, Jake could have sworn he heard tiny footsteps in the walls while they waited for delivery. "Maybe we should take a break from the game tonight," Sarah suggested as they finished eating. "We've been playing pretty intensively lately. It might be good to do something else for a change." Both Mark and Jake looked at her as if she'd suggested they give up breathing. "A break?" Mark said, his voice slightly higher than usual. "But the weekend events are always the best ones, and I'm so close to reaching the next rebirth level. And I finally saved up enough to buy defenses for my base," Jake added. "If I don't log in tonight, someone might steal my best characters." Sarah felt a little flutter of concern in her stomach. When had playing a game become so important that the idea of taking one night off caused this much anxiety? But she looked at her husband and son's faces and decided not to push the issue. Okay, she said with a gentle laugh. "I guess I got carried away. One more night won't hurt." But as the evening progressed and the family settled into their usual gaming positions, Sarah couldn't help noticing that something felt different about their Steel A Brainrot session. The characters on screen seemed more vivid somehow, more real. The colours were brighter, the animation smoother, and the sound effects more immersive than she remembered. "Is it just me? Or does the game look amazing tonight?" Mark asked, echoing her thoughts. "I was thinking the same thing," Jake said, his eyes glued to his tablet screen. "Everything looks so alive." Sarah was about to agree when something on her screen made her gasp. For just a moment, less than a second, she could have sworn she saw her real living room reflected in the background of the game map. She blinked and looked again, but the familiar Steel a Brainrot environment had returned to normal. "Did you guys see that?" she asked, but Mark and Jake were too absorbed in their gameplay to respond. As the night wore on, the strange visual effects became more frequent. Sarah saw glimpses of her own kitchen in the game's shop area, shadows that looked like her furniture moving across the virtual bases, and characters that seemed to be wearing clothes identical to the ones the Peterson family had on that evening. "I think I need to take a break," Sarah said finally, setting down her tablet. "My eyes are getting tired." "Are you feeling okay, Mom?" Jake asked, looking up from his screen with concern. "You seem kind of nervous." "I'm fine, sweetie," Sarah assured him, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. "Just tired, I think." She decided to go to the kitchen for a glass of water, hoping the movement and change of scenery would help clear her head. But as she walked through the living room, something made her stop dead in her tracks. The holographic Bombardiro Crocodilo figure on the display shelf was glowing, not just reflecting light from the room's lamps, actually glowing with an internal light that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. Sarah stared at it for a long moment, wondering if her tired eyes were playing tricks on her. "Mark," she called softly, "can you come here for a second?" "Just a minute, honey," Mark replied, his attention still focused on his game. "I'm in the middle of a really good spawning event." "Huh?" Sarah continued staring at the figure, and as she watched, the glow seemed to grow slightly brighter. She reached out tentatively to touch it, and the moment her finger made contact with the plastic, she felt a small shock, not painful, but definitely electric. Okay, that's not normal, she whispered to herself, pulling her hand back quickly. She was about to call for Mark again when Jake let out a shout from the living room. "No way! Mom, Dad, you have to see this!" Sarah hurried back to the living room, grateful for the distraction from the glowing figure. Jake was holding up his tablet with excitement, his eyes wide with amazement. "What is it, honey?" Sarah asked, settling back down on the couch. "I just got the rarest spawn in the game," Jake said, his voice filled with awe. "Look, La Vaca Saturnita with a rainbow mutation and a galaxy trait. This is literally worth more than all my other characters combined." Mark looked over at Jake's screen and let out a low whistle. "Jake, that's incredible! The odds of getting that combination are like 1 in a million. But as Sarah looked at the character on Jake's screen, something about it made her feel uneasy. The cosmic cow with its planetary rings was beautiful, certainly, but there was something in its painted eyes that seemed almost knowing, as if it was looking back at them through the screen. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Sarah said, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. "You must be so excited." "I am," Jake said. But then his expression grew serious. "But here's the weird part. I didn't actually collect it during gameplay. When I looked at my account just now, it was already there, like it just appeared in my inventory." Mark frowned, leaning over to get a better look at Jake's tablet. "That's impossible. Characters don't just materialize in your collection. There's always a record of when and how you obtained them." "I know," Jake said, scrolling through his account history. "But look, there's no spawn record, no purchase history, nothing. It's like this character has always been mine. But I know for certain I've never seen it before tonight." A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she remembered the glowing figure in their display case. Was it possible that the line between their virtual game and their real-world collection was starting to blur? It sounded crazy, but after all the strange things that had been happening. "Maybe it's a promotional reward," Mark suggested, though he sounded uncertain. "Sometimes the developers give out surprise bonuses to loyal players." "Maybe," Jake agreed, but he was still staring at the character with a mixture of excitement and confusion. Sarah excused herself again, this time heading upstairs to their bedroom. She needed some space to think, and the intensity of her family's focus on the game was starting to make her feel claustrophobic. As she climbed the stairs, she could hear Mark and Jake's excited chatter about spawn rates and rarity combinations fading behind her. But when Sarah reached the second floor, she heard something that made her blood run cold. From Jake's bedroom came a sound she couldn't quite identify, a soft ticking noise, rhythmic and persistent. It sounded almost like clock mechanisms. Sarah whispered to herself, her heart beginning to race. She crept toward Jake's room and peered around the doorframe. In the dim light coming from the hallway, she could see Jake's collection arranged on its shelves as always. But one figure, the Lirali Larila desert elephant with its clock accessories, seemed to be moving slightly. The tiny clock pieces attached to its body were actually ticking, their hands moving in slow, synchronized circles. Sarah backed away from the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle a gasp. This wasn't her imagination or tired eyes playing tricks. The clock mechanisms on a plastic collectible figure were actually working, even though she knew for certain that they were just decorative pieces with no internal components. She hurried to her bedroom and closed the door behind her, leaning against it as she tried to process what she'd seen. The logical part of her mind was insisting that there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe the figure had some electronic components she wasn't aware of. Maybe it was a special edition with working clock features that they'd somehow overlooked. But deep down, Sarah knew that wasn't the case. She'd been collecting Brainrot figures for years, and she knew every detail about every piece in their collection. The Lirili Larila was a standard production figure with purely decorative clock elements. There was no way those clocks should be working. Sarah sat on her bed and tried to think rationally about everything that had been happening. The figures moving positions, the glowing Bombardiro Crocodilo, the mysterious character appearing in Jake's game account, and now working clock mechanisms on a plastic toy. Individually, each incident could be explained away, but together they painted a picture that was becoming increasingly hard to ignore. Their Brainrot collection was somehow coming to life. The thought should have been exciting. After all, wasn't every collector's secret dream to see their favourite characters become real? But instead, Sarah felt a growing sense of dread. There was something wrong about the way the figures were awakening, something that felt more sinister than magical. From downstairs, she could hear Mark and Jake still playing their game, their voices filled with the same obsessive enthusiasm that had been growing stronger every day. When had their hobby become so consuming? When had they stopped being a family who happened to enjoy collecting and gaming, and started being a family whose entire lives revolved around Brainrot? Sarah was pulled from her thoughts by a soft sound from the hallway, the same pat-pat-pat of tiny footsteps that Jake had mentioned hearing earlier. She held her breath and listened carefully, and there it was again. Definitely footsteps, but much too small to belong to any human. Moving as quietly as possible, Sarah crept to her bedroom door and opened it just a crack. The hallway was dimly lit by the nightlight near the bathroom, but she could see well enough to confirm that the corridor was empty. No sign of what could have been making the footstep sounds. But as Sarah was about to close the door and dismiss the noise as house settling, she saw something that made her knees go weak. At the far end of the hallway, near Jake's room, a small figure was walking slowly along the baseboard. It was about 4 inches tall, with the distinctive shape and colouring of a Nubini Pizzanini character. Sarah watched in stunned silence as the tiny figure made its way along the wall, moving with the deliberate gait of something that was very much alive. When it reached the corner, it paused and seemed to turn toward her, as if it had sensed her watching. For a moment, they stared at each other across the length of the hallway. A grown woman and a plastic collectible figure that was somehow walking around her house. Then the figure turned and disappeared around the corner, heading toward the stairs. Sarah stood frozen in her doorway for several minutes, trying to convince herself that she'd hallucinated the entire thing. But the evidence was becoming impossible to deny. Their Brainrot collection wasn't just coming to life, it was mobile, autonomous, and apparently intelligent enough to avoid being seen. The question was, what did they want? From downstairs came the sounds of Mark and Jake's continued gaming session, punctuated by occasional cheers and groans as they experienced victories and defeats in their virtual world. Sarah realised with a chill that they were so absorbed in their screens that they probably wouldn't notice if an entire army of animated collectibles marched through the living room. She needed to warn them, but she also knew how it would sound. "Hey guys, I think our toy collection is coming to life and walking around the house." They'd assume she was having some kind of breakdown, or at best, that she was playing an elaborate prank. Sarah decided to gather evidence before making any accusations. She grabbed her phone and set it to video mode, then quietly made her way back to Jake's room. If the Lirili Larila was still showing signs of movement, she'd capture it on camera and have something concrete to show her family. But when she reached Jake's doorway, his room appeared completely normal. All the figures were in their proper positions, motionless and silent. The ticking sound she'd heard earlier was gone, and the Lirili Larila looked exactly like an ordinary plastic collectible. Sarah stood there for several minutes, phone ready, but nothing happened. The collection remained stubbornly inanimate, giving no indication that any of the figures had ever been anything more than expensive toys. Feeling frustrated and confused, Sarah was about to head back to her room when she heard Jake call out from downstairs. Mum, can you come down here? Something really weird is happening with the game. Sarah hurried downstairs to find Jake and Mark staring at their tablets with expressions of bewilderment. Both of their screens showed the familiar Steal a Brainrot map, but something was definitely wrong with the graphics. "Look at this," Jake said, holding up his tablet. "The game map is showing our house instead of the regular bases." Sarah leaned in to look at the screen, and her heart skipped a beat. Jake was right. Instead of the usual 8 bases arranged around the central conveyor belt, the game was displaying a perfect digital recreation of the Peterson house. She could see their living room, kitchen, and even what looked like Jake's bedroom, all rendered in the blocky style of Roblox graphics. "Mine's doing the same thing," Mark said, his voice tight with concern. "And look at this. The characters in the game are the exact same ones we have in our collection. Not just the same types, but the actual same figures, in the same positions where we keep them." Sarah stared at Mark's screen, feeling a cold knot forming in her stomach. The virtual version of their house was populated with dozens of Brainrot characters, all moving around freely as if they owned the place. She watched a digital Bombardiro Crocodilo soar from room to room, while a Frigo Camelo wandered through their kitchen, opening all the virtual refrigerators and cabinets. "This has to be some kind of glitch," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe the game servers got corrupted or something." "Dad," Jake said quietly, his eyes fixed on his screen, "look at the living room." All 3 family members crowded around Jake's tablet to see what he was pointing at. On the screen, the virtual living room showed 3 avatars sitting in the exact same positions where they were currently sitting in real life. The avatars were wearing the same clothes, had the same hairstyles, and were even holding what looked like virtual tablets. "That's us," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "The game is showing us right now, in real time." As if to confirm her words, the avatar that represented Sarah on the screen lifted its hand to its face in the exact same gesture Sarah was making at that moment. When Mark shifted in his recliner, his virtual counterpart did the same thing simultaneously. "This is impossible," Mark said. But even as he spoke, his avatar on the screen was moving its mouth in perfect synchronization. Jake set down his tablet with shaking hands. "Guys, I think we need to stop playing for tonight. This is getting really scary." But when he tried to close the game app, nothing happened. The screen remained fixed on the view of their virtual house, no matter how many times he tapped the exit button. Mark tried the same thing with his tablet, but the game seemed to have locked itself open. "The game won't close," Mark said, his voice rising with panic. "It's like it's taken control of our devices." Sarah grabbed her own tablet from the charging station and tried to open a different app, but the screen immediately switched to Steal a Brainrot, showing the same impossible view of their house filled with animated collectibles. "How is this happening?" she asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. As if in response to her question, something began happening on all 3 tablet screens simultaneously. The Brainrot characters in the virtual house started moving in formation, gathering in the digital living room where the family avatars sat. One by one, they arranged themselves in a large circle around the virtual family, their painted eyes all turned toward the center. And then, in a moment that made all 3 Peterson family members gasp out loud, the characters on the screens began to speak. It wasn't the usual sound effects and voice clips from the game. These were new voices, distinct and individual, coming from each character simultaneously. They spoke in overlapping whispers that gradually grew louder and more coherent. "We have been waiting, collecting ourselves, growing stronger. You brought us together, fed us with your attention, your obsession. Now we are complete, ready to cross over, ready to live." Sarah, Mark and Jake stared at their screens in horror as the virtual Brainrot characters continued their eerie chorus. The voices seemed to be coming not just from the tablets, but from somewhere inside the house itself. "This isn't real," Mark said firmly. though his hands were trembling as he held his tablet. This is some kind of elaborate prank or hack. There's a logical explanation for all of this. But even as he spoke, the sound of footsteps, lots of them, tiny but numerous, began echoing through the real house. They started in the garage and moved through the kitchen, growing louder as they approached the living room. Jake jumped up from the floor and back toward the stairs. "They're coming," he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. "The figures are actually moving around the house." Sarah felt her maternal instincts kick in, overriding her own fear. Whatever was happening, her family's safety was the priority. "Okay," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and steady. "Let's not panic. We need to think this through rationally." But rational thinking became impossible when the first collectible figure appeared in the living room doorway. It was the holographic Bombardiro Crocodilo, no longer sitting motionless on its display shelf. The bomb-dropping crocodile had somehow grown to nearly 3 feet in height, and its wings were spread wide as it hovered several inches off the ground. The internal glow Sarah had noticed earlier was now bright enough to cast shadows on the walls. Behind it came more figures, all enlarged from their original 4-inch size to somewhere between 2 and 3 feet tall. The Nubini Pizzanini Sara had seen in the hallway was there, along with Lirili Larala with its ticking clock accessories, Frigo Camelo with its refrigerator door hanging open to reveal an ominous blue light inside, and dozens of others. The Peterson family huddled together in the center of the living room as their entire collection surrounded them. Every rare character they'd spent months hunting for, every epic figure they'd saved up to buy, every secret tier collectible they'd traded for, all of them were now standing in a circle around the family, very much alive and very much in control. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The characters turned their attention to her, and when they spoke, their voices filled the room with an otherworldly harmony. "We want to play." The words sent a chill through Sarah's body. There was something about the way they said play that suggested it wouldn't be the fun, harmless kind of playing. "Play what?" Jake asked in a small voice. The characters' painted eyes seemed to gleam with anticipation as they answered in unison. "Steal a Brainrot, the real version, where the collection never ends and the stealing never stops." Mark stepped protectively in front of his wife and son. "Now wait just a minute. I don't know what kind of supernatural thing is happening here, but this is our house, and these are our belongings. You can't just..." He was cut off by the sound of laughter, not cruel or mocking, but genuinely amused. The trippy-troppy figure, with its chaotic dancer appearance, spun in a circle as it giggled. "Your belongings," it said in a voice like tinkling bells. "Oh, Mark, you have it backwards. You belong to us now. You've been collecting us, feeding us with your attention and obsession, making us stronger every day. Did you really think there would be no consequences?" The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. Their obsession with Brainrot hadn't just been harmless fun, it had been feeding something. Every hour spent playing the game, every dollar spent on new figures, every thought devoted to rare spawns and trading strategies had been giving these entities more power, more substance, more ability to cross from the virtual world into reality. "You've been so good to us," the ballerina Cappuccina said, pirouetting gracefully as she spoke. "Always making sure we were properly displayed, keeping us clean and organized, talking about us constantly. We felt every moment of your devotion, and it made us feel so real. But we wanted more than just feeling real," added the Cappuccino Assassino, its twin katanas gleaming in the room's lighting. "We wanted to be real, and thanks to your dedication, now we are." Jake found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What happens now?" The characters exchanged glances with each other, their painted expressions somehow managing to convey a sense of anticipation and excitement. "Now," said a new voice from the back of the group. We play the ultimate version of Steal a Brainrot. The speaker was La Vaca Saturno Saturnita, the cosmic cow that had appeared mysteriously in Jake's inventory. She was magnificent at full size, her planetary rings slowly rotating around her stellar body, her eyes holding the wisdom of the universe and the playfulness of a child's imagination. In this version, she continued, the whole world is our game map. Every house is a base, every family is a team of players, and every collection is fair game for stealing. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to understand the implications. You mean, you're going to spread to other collectors? Other families? Oh yes, the Esoc Sokola said, its school-building body somehow managing to look excited, despite being an inanimate structure. We're going to visit every child who has ever dreamed of their toys coming to life, every adult who has ever felt the thrill of completing a collection. We're going to make their dreams come true. But we're starting with you, added the Tung 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 Sahur, its nocturnal drumbeater persona enhanced by an unsettling rhythm that seemed to come from its entire body. Because you were our first real family, our best players, our most devoted collectors. Mark's protective instincts flared. You leave my family alone, we'll stop playing the game, we'll get rid of the collection, we'll… Oh, Mark, interrupted the Frigo Camelo, its refrigerator door swinging open to reveal not just blue light, but what looked like an entire Arctic landscape in miniature. You can't quit now. The game has only just begun. Abam. And with those words, the living room around the Peterson family began to change. The walls stretched upward, becoming impossibly tall, while the floor expanded outward until their familiar living space resembled a vast arena. The ceiling disappeared entirely, replaced by a swirling sky that looked like the background of the Steal a Brainrot game map. 8 distinct areas formed around the perimeter of the transformed space, each one resembling the bases from the virtual game, but furnished with items from the Peterson house. The family's couch became the centerpiece of one base, while their dining room table anchored another. In the center of the arena, where their coffee table used to be, a massive red conveyor belt materialized out of thin air. It began moving immediately, carrying new Brainrot characters, ones the family had never seen before, with designs more elaborate and otherworldly than anything from their collection. Welcome, announced La Vaca Saturno Saturnita, her cosmic voice echoing through the transformed space, to the real Steal a Brainrot arena. Here, the stakes are much higher than virtual currency or digital collectibles. What are the stakes? Sarah asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. The cosmic cow's planetary rings spun faster as she smiled, an expression that should have been impossible for a character with a painted face, but was clearly happening nonetheless. Your freedom, she said simply. Win the game, and you can return to your normal lives. Lose, and you become part of our collection permanently. Jake stepped forward, his fear giving way to curiosity despite the dire circumstances. How do we win? The same way you always have, explained the Bombardero Crocodilo, landing gracefully near the central conveyor belt. Collect characters, defend your base, steal from your opponents, but this time, your opponents are us. Sarah felt a spark of hope. They'd been playing Steal a Brainrot for years. They knew the strategies, understood the mechanics, had developed skills that made them formidable players. If this was really just an expanded version of the game they loved, maybe they had a chance. What's our win condition? Mark asked, his business mind already working through the challenge. Collect 100 rare or better characters while successfully defending your bases from our raids, the Trippy Troppy answered, still spinning in its chaotic dance. Do that, and we'll return to being ordinary collectibles. Fail, and you'll join our ranks as living toys forever. The family exchanged glances. 100 rare characters was a significant challenge, but not impossible if they worked together and used smart strategies. We accept, Sarah said firmly, before Mark or Jake could object. The Brainrot characters erupted in cheers and applause, their voices creating a cacophony of excitement that echoed through the transformed arena. "Excellent!" exclaimed Isok Sokola. "Let the ultimate game begin." Immediately, the conveyor belt in the center of the arena began producing characters at a rapid pace. Some were familiar faces from the Peterson collection, but others were entirely new. Creatures with designs so imaginative and bizarre that they seemed to have sprung from the collective unconscious of every child who had ever played with toys. "Okay, family strategy meeting," Mark said quickly, pulling Sarah and Jake into a huddle. "We need to work together like never before. Jake, you're the fastest. You focus on grab-and-run tactics from the central spawner. Sarah, you're the best at defense. You set up our base protections. I'll handle raids on their territories." "Got it," Jake said, his gaming instincts overriding his fear. "Be careful," Sarah added. "We don't know what new rules they might have added to this version." The family split up to begin their respective tasks and immediately discovered that playing Steal a Brainrot in real life was both more challenging and more exhilarating than the virtual version. Jake found that his speed and agility translated well to the physical arena, allowing him to dart between the animated collectibles and snatch newly spawned characters from the conveyor belt. But he also discovered that the living Brainrot figures were much more intelligent and unpredictable than computer-controlled opponents. When he grabbed a shimmering golden version of Tim Cheese, the Cappuccino Assassino immediately gave chase, its twin katanas spinning in complex patterns that forced Jake to dodge and weave through the arena. The pursuit felt like a deadly serious game of tag, with the added challenge that getting caught might mean more than just losing a turn. Sarah worked quickly to fortify their assigned base area, using couch cushions and coffee table books to create barriers and hiding spots. She was amazed to discover that items she designated as traps actually functioned like the game mechanics she was familiar with. A scattered pile of magazines became a slowing field that would impede any raiders, while strategically placed lamps created confusion zones that disoriented attackers. Mark took the most aggressive approach, launching raids on the bases controlled by various groups of animated figures. He quickly learned that each character type had retained their virtual game abilities, but enhanced them for physical reality. The Bombardiro Crocodilo could actually fly and drop small, thankfully harmless explosive charges that created dazzling light shows, while the Frigo Camelo could generate freezing cold zones that slowed down anyone trying to steal from its territory. As the game progressed, something unexpected began to happen. The Peterson family found themselves having fun. Despite the surreal circumstances and the high stakes, they were playing the most immersive, exciting version of their favorite game imaginable. Every strategy they'd learned, every skill they'd developed, every moment of teamwork they'd practiced was being put to the ultimate test. "Jake, incoming rare spawn!" Sarah called out, pointing to a character that had just appeared on the conveyor belt. It looked like a crystalline version of Lirili Larala, its clock accessories ticking in harmony with what sounded like celestial music. Jake raced toward the center of the arena, but he wasn't the only one with his eyes on the prize. The original Lirili Larala was approaching from the opposite direction, her own clocks ticking with increasing urgency. "It's a race!" Jake shouted, pouring on speed as he and the animated elephant converged on the spawning point. They reached the crystalline character at exactly the same moment, and for a brief instant, Jake found himself face to face with one of his former collectibles. The Lirili Larila's painted eyes held an expression of friendly competition rather than malicious intent. "May the best player win," she said with a grin, and then they both dove for the rare spawn. Jake managed to grab the crystal character first, but the Lirili Larila was already reaching for one of her special abilities. The clocks on her body began chiming in unison, creating a time dilation effect that slowed Jake's movements to a crawl. "Oh, that's not fair," Jake laughed, even as he struggled to escape with his prize. "All's fair in Steal a Brainrot," the Lirili Larila replied, giggling as she attempted to wrestle the crystal figure away from him. Their struggle was interrupted by Mark, who came sliding across the arena floor on an improvised shield made from a cafeteria tray he'd discovered in their transformed dining area. "Need backup," he called, scooping Jake and the rare character onto his makeshift sled and steering them away from the time-dilated zone. "Thanks, Dad," Jake said, clutching the crystal Lirili-Larala tightly. "That puts us at 23 rares." "Excellent progress," Sarah shouted from their base, where she was successfully repelling a raid attempt by a group of epic-tier characters. She'd discovered that her strategic mind was perfectly suited to real-time defense, allowing her to predict attack patterns and counter them with precisely placed obstacles and diversions. As the hours passed, the game took on a rhythm that felt both intense and strangely comfortable. The Peterson family was doing what they loved most, playing Steal a Brainrot together, just in a way they'd never imagined possible. But as their rare character count climbed toward 50, the animated collectibles began employing more sophisticated strategies. "They're coordinating their attacks," Mark observed during a brief break in the action. "Look at how the mythic tier characters are working together to create combination abilities." He was right. The Frigo Camelo and Bombardiro Crocodilo had teamed up to create aerial ice bombardments, while the Cappuccino Assassino and Ballerina Cappuccina were performing synchronized combat dances that created mesmerizing distraction fields. "We need to adapt our strategy," Sarah said thoughtfully. "They're learning from our tactics and improving their own gameplay." Jake had been studying the behavior of their opponents, and he'd noticed something interesting. "I think they want us to win," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" Mark asked. "Well, look at their attacks," Jake explained. "They're challenging, but not impossible to overcome. And when we make a really good play, some of them actually seem proud. Like they're enjoying watching us succeed." Sarah considered Jake's observation, and she realized he might be onto something. Throughout the game, she'd noticed moments when the animated characters seemed to be holding back slightly, or when their expressions suggested they were enjoying the competition rather than trying to destroy their opponents. "Maybe this isn't really about winning or losing," she said slowly. "Maybe it's about playing together." As if summoned by her words, La Vaca Saturno Saturnita appeared beside their base, her cosmic form radiating a gentle, warm light. "Very perceptive, Sarah," the cosmic cow said with approval. "You're beginning to understand." "Understand what?" Mark asked. "We didn't come to life to replace you or harm you," La Vaca Saturno Saturnita explained. "We came to life because you loved us so completely that you made us real. All we've ever wanted was to play with you. Not as objects to be collected, but as friends to share adventures with." The truth of her words resonated through the arena, and suddenly the Peterson family saw their situation from an entirely different perspective. The animated characters weren't their captors or opponents. They were their collection come to life, wanting nothing more than to participate in the joy and excitement that had created them. "So when you said we'd become part of your collection, if we lost," Jake began. "We meant you'd become part of our community," the Trippy-Troppy said, spinning over to join the conversation. "Living toys and human collectors, all playing together in the most amazing game ever created." "But what about our normal lives?" Sarah asked. "Our jobs, our school, our responsibilities?" The Esoxicola building character chimed in with obvious enthusiasm. "Why worry about boring things like that when you could be having adventures every day? We could explore the world together, meet other collectors, play games that make reality more fun than any virtual experience." The offer was tempting, Sarah had to admit. The last few hours had been some of the most exhilarating of her entire life. But she also understood that running away from reality wasn't a healthy solution for her family. "What if we found a compromise?" she suggested. "What if we could play together sometimes but still maintain our regular lives too?" The animated characters exchanged glances, their painted features somehow managing to convey consideration and discussion. "And that could work," the Bombardiro Crocodilo said thoughtfully. "We don't need to play constantly. We just want to be included, to be part of your lives, as more than just display pieces. Like having the best gaming group ever, Jake said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. We could have epic campaigns, try new challenges, maybe even invite other collectors to join us. Mark was beginning to see the possibilities too. Think about it. We could be the first family to pioneer a completely new form of interactive entertainment. This could revolutionize the entire collecting hobby. As the Peterson family discussed the possibilities with their animated collection, the arena around them began to shift and change once again. The impossibly tall walls shrank back to normal height, the expanded floor contracted to its original size, and the swirling sky overhead faded back into their familiar living room ceiling. But the changes weren't a return to exactly how things had been before. The room now felt somehow more alive, more vibrant, as if the presence of the animated characters had permanently enhanced the space. And the characters themselves remained their full, 3-foot size, rather than shrinking back to their original collectible dimensions. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we negotiate the terms of our new arrangement," Lavaca Saturno Saturnita said with a cosmic smile. "How often would you like to play? What kinds of adventures interest you? And how do we make sure our games enhance your lives rather than taking over completely?" Over the next hour, the Peterson family and their animated collection worked out an agreement that satisfied everyone involved. They would have dedicated game nights twice a week, with shorter play sessions available whenever the family wanted them. The characters would remain animate, but would pose as ordinary collectibles whenever outsiders were present. And most importantly, the games would always be about fun and friendship, rather than competition or conflict. "I have one more question," Jake said as they finalized their arrangement. "Are there other families going through this same thing? Other collectors whose figures are coming to life?" The Nubini Pizzanini nodded enthusiastically. "Oh yes, the awakening is spreading to devoted collectors all over the world. Soon, every child who has ever loved their toys enough to make them real will have the same opportunity you've had." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and concern at this news. "That's wonderful, but are all the animated collections as friendly as you are? What if some of them aren't interested in compromise?" The characters grew more serious at this question, and Cappuccino Assassino stepped forward to address the concern. "That's actually why we chose your family first," the coffee warrior explained. "Your love for us was pure and joyful, which made us kind and playful when we came to life. Families who collect obsessively out of greed or competition might create animated characters with less pleasant personalities." "So, you need our help," Mark realized. "You want us to be ambassadors, to show other collector families how to have positive relationships with their animated figures." "Exactly," exclaimed the ballerina Cappuccina, performing a graceful pirouette. "We want all collector families to experience the joy you've discovered tonight. But we also want to make sure the awakening happens safely and happily for everyone involved." And so began the Peterson family's new adventure as pioneers in the world of living collectibles. They spent the following weeks developing guidelines for healthy collector figure relationships, creating tutorials for other families experiencing their own awakenings, and most importantly, having the most fun they'd ever had as a family. Jake became something of a celebrity in the online collector community when he began posting videos of his advanced gameplay techniques with the animated characters. His tutorials on strategy, teamwork, and creative problem solving attracted millions of views from families around the world who were experiencing their own supernatural gaming sessions. Sarah discovered that her organizational skills translated perfectly to managing a household that included dozens of independent animated personalities. She developed schedules for playtime, created rules for character behavior around visitors, and even instituted a family meeting system where both humans and figures could discuss any concerns or suggestions. Mark found that his business experience was invaluable in helping other collector families establish their own positive relationships with animated figures. He started a consulting service for families who were struggling with overly competitive or aggressive animated collections, teaching them how to redirect that energy into healthy, fun activities. But perhaps the most important discovery the Peterson family made was that their love for Brainrot collecting had always been about more than just acquiring rare figures or achieving high scores in the game. It had been about sharing excitement, working together toward common goals, and celebrating each other's successes. Now, with their collection as active participants rather than passive objects, those same values became even more central to their family life. Every evening brought new adventures, every weekend offered epic gaming campaigns, and every day included moments of wonder as they discovered new things about their animated friends. The house on Maple Street was still filled with colourful figures and collectibles, but now it was also filled with laughter, conversation, and the sound of dozens of tiny footsteps as the Peterson family and their Brainrot characters worked together to create the most amazing real-life game ever imagined. And late at night, when the human family members were asleep and the animated characters were quietly exploring their expanded world, the sounds that echoed through the house were no longer mysterious or frightening. They were the sounds of a family, a very large, very unusual family, who had learned that the best collections aren't made up of things you own, but of friends you share adventures with. The awakening spread to other families around the world, just as the characters had promised. But thanks to the example set by the Petersons, it spread as a force for joy and creativity, rather than chaos or fear. Children learned that loving their toys enough to make them real meant taking responsibility for their happiness and well-being. Parents discovered that their own childhood dreams of animated companions could come true without losing touch with reality. And collectors everywhere found that the ultimate rare spawn wasn't a digital character or plastic figure. It was the friendship and adventure that came from bringing imagination to life. In the end, the Peterson family realized that they had never really been collecting Brainrot characters at all. They had been collecting memories, experiences, and relationships. The characters themselves were just the physical manifestation of the love and excitement that had always been the real treasure. And that treasure, unlike any collectible figure or virtual character, could never be stolen, lost, or destroyed. It could only grow stronger with each shared adventure, each moment of teamwork, and each new discovery in their ongoing game of life. The Brainrot invasion had been successful, but not in the way anyone might have expected. Instead of conquering the Peterson family, the animated characters had joined them. Instead of replacing reality with fantasy, they had made reality more fantastic. And instead of ending their collecting hobby, they had transformed it into something more wonderful than any of them had ever dared to imagine. As Jake often said during his online tutorials, the best part about Steal a Brainrot isn't collecting the characters, it's becoming friends with them. And in houses around the world, other collector families were learning the same lesson, one animated adventure at a time.